On the 5th day of January 1942, as exultant shouts of victory echoed through the streets of Tokyo and banners celebrated Japan's astonishing triumphs, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sat far from the capital, already thinking about what came next. While the public rejoiced, Yamamoto instructed the staff of the Imperial Combined Fleet to begin preparing for the second stage of operations in the Pacific War. Reports from the Philippines, Malaya, and other newly attacked regions lay spread before him, and to Yamamoto the pattern was unmistakable. Within months, Japanese troops would dominate East Asia and much of the Western Pacific. The speed of conquest was breathtaking, but Yamamoto was not intoxicated by victory. Instead, he turned to his chief of staff, Admiral Matome Ugaki, and gave him a deadline. The plans, Yamamoto said, must be completed by mid-February. Time, he believed, was already slipping away. The lightning-fast Japanese advance shocked planners in Tokyo and ignited bitter disagreement within the Imperial General Staff. One faction, driven by ardent military nationalism, wanted to press forward relentlessly while Japan was winning, no matter how far the empire had to stretch. Another group, represented most clearly by Yamamoto, felt unease beneath the celebrations. Yamamoto had never been enthusiastic about war with the United States and Britain. He worried deeply about what lay beyond the first flush of victory. That concern was one reason he remained at sea aboard the battleship Yamato, flagship of the Combined Fleet. Friends within the General Staff feared that if Yamamoto stayed in Tokyo, his outspoken opposition to unlimited war might get him assassinated. Even at sea, his views were well known. Ugaki recorded in his diary Yamamoto's insistence on far-sighted statesmanship after this first month of glorious victory. Yamamoto repeatedly warned that Japan could not fight the Western powers indefinitely and expect to win. His criticism was often directed at politicians like Prince Kono, men Yamamoto felt had plunged the nation into war without understanding its true scope. 3 months before Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto had confided these fears to an old friend, Ryoichi Sasakawa, president of an ultranationalist organization, during a meeting at the Imperial Navy Club in Shiba. Yamamoto told him bluntly that war was inevitable because of political decisions already made. At first, he said, Japan would have everything its own way, spreading outward like an octopus extending its tentacles. Now, just 1 month into the war, that octopus lay stretched almost flat across the Pacific. Yet Yamamoto also warned that this euphoria could not last. The moment Singapore fell, he believed, Britain's position in Asia would crack. India would be shaken, and London might be willing to listen to peace overtures. Yamamoto spoke with authority. He had served at the London naval conferences and as naval attaché in Washington. He knew both Britain and America well. Once war began, he believed Japan had perhaps a year and a half of advantage. After that, he told Sasakawa, Japan must secure a peace agreement. He hoped his friend would carry that message quietly to influential right-wing leaders. On January 5th, victory seemed close enough to touch. The American battleship fleet lay crippled at Pearl Harbor. British battleships Repulse and Prince of Wales rested on the seabed off Malaya. Manila and the U.S. naval base at Cavite had fallen. Hong Kong had surrendered. Japanese forces were advancing toward the Dutch East Indies, Rabaul, New Ireland, Ambon, and the Solomon Islands. Yet Pearl Harbor had not delivered everything Yamamoto wanted. America's aircraft carriers had been at sea and survived intact. They remained a looming threat. Yamamoto knew that what Japan needed now was something spectacular, something decisive. The fall of Singapore, he thought, was still months away. If Japan was to force negotiations, he would have to strike elsewhere. His planners debated where the next blow should fall. An attack on the Soviet Union was rejected by the army, already bogged down in China and Southeast Asia. Yamamoto's preferred option was bold, a thrust into the Indian Ocean, drawing out and destroying Britain's Far Eastern Fleet, then pushing toward the Middle East to link with German forces advancing toward the Caucasus oil fields. Control of oil, Yamamoto believed, meant control of the war. The army refused even to consider such a campaign. That left two alternatives. One, favored by the Naval General Staff in Tokyo, called for isolating Australia by capturing New Guinea, New Caledonia, Fiji, and Samoa. Some planners even spoke confidently of occupying Australia and New Zealand. Yamamoto disliked this plan. It would take too long and would not deliver the psychological shock he sought. Worse, he knew Pearl Harbor had awakened a fierce American desire for revenge. Even Singapore's fall would not break American resolve. In January, Yamamoto ordered another plan drawn up. 2 months later, officers carried it to Tokyo under the name MI Plan. It envisioned a decisive battle near Midway Island, where the American carrier force would be destroyed. Alongside it came the AL Plan, outlining operations through Alaska and the Aleutians, with Hawaii, and perhaps even the American West Coast, looming beyond. Victories at Midway and in the Aleutians, Yamamoto believed, would give Japan leverage for peace. The admirals argued fiercely in Tokyo, but Yamamoto prevailed. What might have been achieved through the fall of Singapore or the collapse of Bataan and Corregidor was soon overshadowed by another shock, the April raid by Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle's B-25 bombers on Tokyo. That raid shattered any illusion that America was beaten. It was only the beginning. When Midway erupted into disaster for Japan, there was no time for public reckoning. The loss of 4 fleet carriers was concealed, known only to the Navy's highest levels. Even as Yamamoto's plans collapsed, the Naval General Staff in Tokyo continued pushing south, toward New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, seeking to cut Australia off from America. Japanese forces took Rabaul in January and began relentless reconnaissance and bombing across the region. Australians warned General Douglas MacArthur that New Guinea would soon be the next target. If it fell, Northern Australia would lie exposed. Darwin had already been bombed. In March, Japanese troops landed at Salamaua. In May, an occupation force aimed at Port Moresby was turned back in the Coral Sea, but Tulagi was seized, and a seaplane base constructed. The Battle of the Coral Sea convinced Allied planners that a Japanese thrust south was imminent. MacArthur begged Washington for carriers and planes, but Admiral Ernest J. King warned that America had only 2 operational carriers in the Pacific. Meanwhile, intelligence suggested Japan was preparing something big. As events unfolded, Japanese forces landed in New Guinea and expanded air bases at Lae. Even after Midway, Imperial headquarters pressed ahead, planning renewed advances toward Port Moresby, New Caledonia, Fiji, and Samoa. In Washington, debate raged. MacArthur proposed a preemptive strike against Rabaul, but Admiral King rejected it, preferring a Navy-led drive from the New Hebrides. Guadalcanal barely registered as more than a dot on the map. Yet intelligence soon changed that. In late May and June, reports trickled in, Japanese aircraft photographing Guadalcanal, grass burned off, tents erected, a wharf under construction. Coast watchers and intercepted radio messages confirmed it. The Japanese were building an airfield. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner immediately understood the implication. Guadalcanal could not be allowed to fall fully into Japanese hands. Within weeks, he was racing to assemble an amphibious force, even though neither he nor anyone else truly knew how to conduct such an operation. Vice Admiral Robert Gormley, sent to command the South Pacific, was deeply pessimistic. He and MacArthur both believed the invasion was premature and dangerously under-resourced. They recommended delay. Admiral King refused. The invasion would go forward. Everything about the plan was rushed. Supplies were loaded haphazardly. Troops trained briefly, poorly. Rehearsals were a mess. Carrier Commander Frank Jack Fletcher warned he would protect the landings for only 2 days. Despite doubts and arguments, the fleet sailed. In early August 1942, 75 ships slipped through rain squalls toward the Solomon Islands. The Japanese, preoccupied with New Guinea and convinced the Americans were still reeling from defeat, suspected nothing. As dawn broke on August 7th, carrier aircraft roared into the sky. Bombs fell on Guadalcanal, Tulagi, Gavutu, and Tanambogo. Japanese seaplanes were destroyed on the water. Marines went ashore on Guadalcanal and met almost no resistance. Barracks stood empty. Breakfast lay abandoned on tables. The enemy had fled into the hills. Elsewhere, the fighting was brutal. On Tulagi, Marine raiders under Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson slammed into hardened Japanese defenders who fought from caves and ridges, refusing to surrender. The combat was savage and intimate. Grenades hurled into dugouts, machine gun fire from trees, suicidal counterattacks in the night. On Gavutu and Tanambogo, Japanese troops fought literally to the last man, even charging tanks with grenades and gasoline-soaked rags. By nightfall, the Americans held their objectives, but the cost was sobering. Japanese air attacks began almost immediately, met by fierce resistance from American carrier fighters. The skies became classrooms of combat, where American pilots learned, painfully and quickly, how to counter the agile but fragile Zero. As August 8th wore on, the invasion seemed secure on land. Yet danger loomed at sea. Admiral Fletcher withdrew his carriers, leaving the transports exposed. Unseen and undetected, a Japanese cruiser force slipped south through a narrow waterway that Americans would soon know as the Slot. Because of missed reports, flawed search patterns, and divided command, the most obvious avenue of approach lay completely uncovered. As darkness fell, the stage was set. The Marines dug in around Henderson Field, unaware that powerful enemy warships were steaming toward them through the night. The battle for Guadalcanal had only just begun, and the war in the Pacific was about to enter a far more brutal and unforgiving phase.